Shabbat Shalom once more. As an ardent feminist, I was struck by several articles from the BBC, from NPR, the Washington Post, and our own CBC that I read over the winter break about a recent announcement from the Taliban banning female students from higher education in Afghanistan in both public and private settings. The effects are, as we might surmise, devastating not just for women, but for a country that is already mired in a humanitarian crisis, perhaps one that could be perceived amidst the pretense of a fairer, more moderate rule when the Taliban took power for obvious reasons to much dismay in August 2021 or thereabouts. It is even more devastating considering the sacrifices our fellow women made in the name of an education, a right that we might take for granted here in this good country of Canada. In a particularly moving quote from an NPR piece, a third-year journalism student who wished to remain anonymous due to fear of retribution is quoted as saying, "Is being a girl a crime? If that's the case, I wish I wasn't a girl." To be sure, the news has not been taken lightly. The announcement drew condemnation from foreign governments and the United Nations at the violation of what is widely regarded as a fundamental human right. On a more grassroots level, throughout Kabul, the capital, some women did stage small protests, but these were, sadly, and again, perhaps predictably, shut down by Taliban officials. I was thinking about the bravery and the circumstances of our Afghani sisters overseas and this latest round of restrictions upon them, actually when reflecting on our week's parashah, Shemot, the first in the book of Torah of the same name, in which we learn of two other women, Shifra and Puah, who were brave and faced adversity in their own right. Shifra and Puah, you might already know, are the two midwives who deceived Pharaoh by claiming that the Hebrew women gave birth so fast they could not possibly get to the baby boys in time to kill them as decreed. Fascinatingly, the Midrash interprets Shifra and Puah to be Moses' own mother and sister, Yocheved and Miriam. Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sacks of blessed memory points out that this connection is made because the Torah uses the ambiguous term Hamiyaldot ha'ivriot, which could mean either the Hebrew midwives or the midwives to the Hebrews or of the Hebrews. If we follow this second interpretation, and Shifra and Puah are Egyptian in origin, then we can ask, or this first interpretation, I should say, and they are in fact Hebrew, we can then ask ourselves the entirely logical question of whether Pharaoh could have actually realistically expected the Israelites to, let's be blunt, kill their own children. Sacks then states that the Torah's ambiguity might have been deliberate, for the women were essentially being asked to commit a crime either way and needed to make a choice. Either they were responsible for these babies and those consequences on one hand, or they're responsible for defying their sovereign on another. I raise this up as Sacks then reminds us that, until modern times, rulers had absolute power and only had to make concessions to other, more powerful groups or people, which eventuated in the later notion of the divine right of kings, or the belief that a king, including a pharaoh or another ruler, was appointed by God. Subsequently, the idea of placing moral limits on their reign was laughable, and to challenge the king would be to challenge the entire natural order of the universe and to defy reality itself. Especially in the midst of the ambiguity of which people Shifra and Puah belonged to, we must not understate the gravity of the decision that they made to follow their own moral compasses and display enormous courage in deceiving their Pharaoh. As a result, they become heroines of the human spirit and giants in the story of humankind. Their reward is, as told by the Midrash Shemot Rabbah, that God provided households, meaning families, for Shifra and Puah, based upon the verse in our parashah that the divine Vayetev dealt well with them, and the reverential awe that the midwives held for God, the God of Israel, which is said to have acted as the buttress or the source of fortitude against the harshness of Pharaoh. Put differently, they're rewarded with new lives of their own to care for, the very same thing that they worked so hard to bring into this world. Subsequently, there is a redemptive quality found through the example of Shifra and Puah. In fact, our Talmud in Tractate Sota explicitly names this notion, with our sages teaching that, on account of the righteous women in that generation, the Jewish people were redeemed from Egypt. This passage, it can be noted, explicitly then refers to childbirth and the tending of new babies, the very task of our two midwives, Shifra and Puah. The Women's Torah Commentary, which is the famous green Torah commentary that you may be familiar with and which we have a few copies of around Holy Blossom, will elaborate here and bring us back to the aforementioned Yocheved and Miriam, as well as Pharaoh's daughter. While Shifra and Puah are extraordinarily brave in resisting Pharaoh, it is Yocheved who takes a major chance and floats her newborn son down the Nile in the hopes that he will be spared and will find a brighter future in being sent away. Shortly thereafter, it is the daughter of Pharaoh who discovers Moses and takes him in as her own, with Miriam, Moses' sister, traditionally and conveniently said to be the one who then offers to secure a wet nurse after overseeing this incident, and that wet nurse is none other than Yocheved, bringing us full circle. So let's take pause for a moment and consider the reasons why the actions of Shifra and Puah, especially, are so deeply heroic. Two of those reasons are given by Rabbi Anna Bonheim, who outlines the following. She firstly reiterates the importance of Shifra and Puah choosing to value life over politics and to put humanity first, by simply seeing babies, as people with not only possibility ahead, but also not defined by their religion, their gender, or their status. We can then remember that one of those babies would turn out to be Moses, and this is an incidental fact, superseded by that Jewish value, that concept of pikuach nefesh, of preserving a life. So, secondly, we can look to the power of women in being in this uniquely female space. It's easy to think that the events that make history are the decrees, the battles, and the moments of high drama, and perhaps everything that Pharaoh stands for. Yet Shifra and Puah also remind us that history can happen in the home and happen in the place of birth. Their actions literally determine the fate of a people by setting the stage for Moses to live. In my own 2 cents, we can also remember that Shifra and Puah were not just women, but were also the subservient of the subservient. It's crucial to note that these midwives, whether they were Egyptian or Israelite or whoever they might have been, were not out there helping Egyptian women through the birthing process, but rather the Hebrew slaves. We can therefore derive that Shifra and Puah would have been considered incredibly low on the social totem pole, and particularly if they were in fact Egyptian and not even assisting their own counterparts in society. In other words, and in all events, through this conspiracy of women working together across class, racial, and religious lines, and within a system that worked entirely against them, the future leader of the Exodus is spared, and with it, the entire people of Israel. In our world today, going back to our anonymous journalist, she added that she had not lost all hope yet. She still hopes for her own redemption of sorts. God willing, I will continue my studies in any way, she says. I'm starting online studies, and if it doesn't work, I will have to leave the country and go to another country. What she and what the other women of our parashah this week may ultimately teach us is that perhaps it is worth, at least every once in a while, listening to that still small voice in our heads, the one which helps us make brave decisions and helps us become who we are meant to be. After our recent winter break, our vacation, I hope we've all had the chance to do just that and feel refreshed enough to face a new year together in which we too can make courageous choices. Whether in the name of our fellow women, in the name of an education to protect the vulnerable, or anything else that needs correcting to be fairer and more just in our world. So in light of our topic this evening, a perfect practical first step to do this is on Wednesday night, this Wednesday night, the 18th of January, as we welcome Canadian-American lawyer and author Dahlia Lithwick to Holy Blossom, who'll be in conversation with Rabbi Splansky about her new book entitled, appropriately, Lady Justice. And it writes exactly about, in which she writes about exactly what we've been speaking on tonight, women carving out space for themselves in places that have not been welcoming to them. It is sure to be an enlightening discussion. And finally, although it is for the end of a book of Torah and not the beginning, my hope nonetheless for us this Shabbat is Chazak, Chazak, V'nit Chazek. Be strong, and we shall strengthen one another at this new beginning. Ken Yehi Ratzon and Shabbat Shalom.